What is up, everybody, and welcome to NFL Nexus. This is the channel where we connect the dots on all the biggest stories shaking up the league. And today, man, we are tackling a monster of a topic, one that could totally change the game of football as we know it. I'm talking about the non-stop push for an 18-game regular season. Now look, this is way more than just adding another game to the schedule. This is a massive battle over billions of dollars, player health, and really the soul of the league itself. And to get you to really understand what's at stake, we're going to connect this huge league-wide debate all the way down to the career of a single free agent. It's the perfect example of how these big decisions made in boardrooms have real consequences down in the trenches. Before we dive in, if you're into this kind of deep analysis, do me a huge favor. Hit that subscribe button and give this explainer a thumbs up. It really helps the channel out. And hey, you can also support us by grabbing one of our coloring books. They're perfect for kids, grandkids, even for you. The link is right down in the description, or you can just scan that QR code on the screen. All right, let's get into it. So let's just start with the main question that's bouncing around every single front office and locker room right now. Is 17 games not enough? Seriously, it feels like we blinked and the conversation already moved on. I mean, remember, the switch from 16 to 17 games in 2021, that was a seismic event. It was the first time the regular season got longer in 43 years, all the way back to 1978. And there was a ton of pushback from players, right? They were warning everybody about the physical toll, the extra wear and tear on their bodies in what's already a brutal marathon. And yet here we are, just a few years into this new reality, and the league's most powerful people are already signaling, hey, we're not done yet. Turns out the 17-game season wasn't the final stop, it was just a layover. And this isn't some far-off fantasy anymore. This has become the #1 issue that's going to shape the next big labor war in pro football.
So, to untangle all of this, here's our game plan for today. First, we're going to follow the money. With more games, more money. Then, we'll step into the ring for the main event, owners versus players. After that, we'll look at the calendar and pinpoint the exact moment this whole thing is set to explode, the 2031 battleground. And once we've got the big picture down, we're going to zoom all the way in on a single team that found a wild, unexpected opportunity. We'll tie it all together with what I'm calling the Epinesa equation, a real-world story that shows you exactly how these huge negotiations impact a single player's career.
Okay, let's kick this off with Section 1, and you know we've got to follow the money. Since the league went to 17 games back in 2021, the NFL's revenue has just exploded. I mean, we're talking about numbers that are mind-boggling, even for the NFL. You've got record-breaking media deals over $100 billion, franchise values soaring past $5, $6, $7 billion, and the salary cap has blown up right along with it. In a world this competitive, that kind of success doesn't mean you take a victory lap. Nope, it means you immediately get into huddle and ask, okay, how do we get more? So right now, the league owners are basically running a masterclass in PR, planting the seeds for the next expansion. And they're framing it, not as a greedy cash grab, but as the next logical, totally inevitable step for the league's growth. This quote right here, from Colts owner Irsay-Gordon, is just a perfect window into the ownership mindset. You have to really break down the wording here. First, she frames it as something the players would want. The logic sounds almost generous, right? More games mean more TV inventory. That inventory gets sold for billions, which means more revenue for the league, and since the players get a cut of that revenue, boom, the higher salary cap, bigger paychecks. It's a rising tide lifts all boats kind of argument. Then she uses that phrase, a better product. Let's be real about what that means from a business angle. It means getting rid of one preseason game, a game fans hate and get charged full price for, and swapping it with a regular season game that has real stakes, real drama, and huge ratings. From a purely business perspective, it's a pretty tough argument to beat.
But while that logic might look beautiful on a spreadsheet, it runs smack into the physical reality of the guys whose bodies are the product being sold. And that brings us to the core of this whole thing. This isn't just some simple negotiation over a few percentage points. This is a fundamental, almost philosophical disagreement. It's capital versus labor. It's the balance sheet versus the MRI report. It's the long-term chase for more money versus the short-term need to just stay healthy.
And this slide just perfectly shows you the giant canyon between the two sides. On one side, you've got the owners. They're looking at revenue charts and growth projections. For them, it's a no-brainer. More money for everybody. A better product for fans by ditching a useless preseason game. And this belief that, hey, injuries can be managed with modern science and better training. But then you look at the other side, the players. For them, this isn't a 6% bump in revenue. It's a 6% increase in the number of violent, full-speed car crashes their bodies have to absorb. It's one more week of taking hits, one less week to recover in a season that already pushes them to their absolute limit. To a player, an 18th game isn't just another paycheck. It's another spin of the roulette wheel with their career and their long-term health. And for them, that's just not on the table. And if you think I'm exaggerating, just listen to these words from David White, the interim head of the Players Association. The language he's using here is so deliberate, so powerful. He doesn't say, "we have concerns," or "we'd rather not." He says, "no appetite." He makes it a point to say it's not casual for them, calling it a very serious issue. This is not the soft diplomatic language you use when you're starting a friendly negotiation. This is red line language. The union is signaling, loud and clear, that adding another game isn't some small change they're willing to trade for. They see it as a fundamental shift in their working conditions, a bridge too far, and they're treating it with every ounce of seriousness that it deserves. So, you've got the owners pushing hard for it, and the players are absolutely dug in against it. So where does that leave us? It's the classic immovable object meets unstoppable force. How does a conflict like this ever get solved? Well, that brings us right to our next section, the battleground. Because this whole debate isn't just happening in a vacuum, there's a ticking clock on the wall and it's counting down to a very specific date. A date when the entire power structure of the league gets tossed up in the air and everything is back on the table. This timeline right here lays out the whole chess match. So look back at 2021. That's when the owners got their 17th game in the last CBA fight. That was a huge win for them. Now fast forward to today, and what are we seeing? The public posturing, the strategic leaks, these are the opening shots of the next war. But the date that everyone has circled in bright red is March 2031. That's the day the current collective bargaining agreement, the giant legal document that runs the entire league, expires. On that day, the truce is over. And that moment is the point of maximum leverage for both sides. For the owners, it's their shot to reshape the league's finances. And for the players, it's the threat of a work stoppage, the one and only weapon they have that can grind this multi-billion-dollar machine to a dead stop. Okay, for anyone who isn't a huge labor law nerd, let's just quickly break down what a CBA actually is. Just think of it like the Constitution of the NFL. It's this massive, incredibly detailed contract between the 32 owners and the Players Association. This one document literally dictates everything about a player's job, the minimum salary a guy drafted in the 7th round can make, how many padded practices a team can have in training camp, the entire drug policy, their pensions, and, most important for us today, the length of the season and the exact formula for how every single dollar the league makes gets split up. When that thing expires, the whole business of football is up for grabs.
So that brings us to the multi-billion-dollar question. If the players are so against this, what on earth could the owners possibly use as leverage to get them to even think about an 18th game? Well, Mike Florio over at Pro Football Talk, who's one of the most connected guys out there, he has this really fascinating and honestly pretty ruthless theory. Right now, the players get a great deal on the revenue split. It's pretty close to 50-50. Florio's theory is that in 2031, the owners will make that split their ultimate bargaining chip. They won't just ask for an 18th game, they'll threaten to completely change the revenue model to favor them more. The unspoken threat is basically, we're going to take a bigger piece of this pie unless you agree to help us make the pie bigger by adding another game. It's like a high-stakes poker game where the owners are threatening to change the rules of the casino unless the players agree to play one more hand.
Okay, so for the last few minutes, we've been way up high, at the 30,000-foot view, right? We're talking about abstract things like billions of dollars and collective bargaining. But now we're going to pivot. We're going to take this giant, abstract debate about risk and reward and show you how those exact same themes, player health, money, career-altering risk, play out in the real-world career of one specific player who just went through it. And that brings us to the story of defensive end A.J. Epinesa. His recent wild ride through NFL free agency is just a perfect real-world case study of the razor's edge every single player in this league has to walk. It's a story about how one single medical checkup, one doctor's report, can instantly change a player's entire career and, in a weird twist, create a golden opportunity for a team that desperately needed one. So just try to picture this. A.J. Epinesa, a really solid defensive end from the Buffalo Bills, hits free agency for the first time. The Cleveland Browns call him up and they agree on a deal. 1 year, up to $5 million. For Epinesa, this is it. This is the moment he's worked his entire life for. His job is secure, he's got a great contract, he probably calls his family, his agent, life is good. But then comes that final hurdle that every player has to clear, the team physical. And somewhere in that room, after the MRIs and the tests, the Browns medical team saw something they didn't like. They got nervous, they decided the risk was just too high, and they pulled the plug on the deal. And just like that, the contract disappears, the security vanishes, and A.J. Epinesa is suddenly, shockingly, back on the open market, looking for a job. Okay, now let's flip over to the other side of the story and look at it from the Indianapolis Colts point of view. Their general manager, Chris Ballard, came into the offseason with one huge flashing red light on his to-do list. Pass rush. They had to get better. Their big plan was to go after a top guy, Trey Hendrickson, but he ended up signing somewhere else. Now, the main waves of free agency are over. The market's pretty much picked clean of top talent, and they still have a massive hole at a starting defensive end spot. They're running out of options, and then, all of a sudden, a phone call comes in. A proven starting defensive end in Irsay-Gordon, a guy they thought was long gone, is somehow available again.
And this is where the cold, hard math of building a team really kicks in. This is what I'm calling the Epiness equation. For a GM like Chris Ballard, this isn't just about talent anymore. It becomes this really complex, strategic calculation. You've got a player who's obviously productive, who fits a desperate need perfectly. But now, that player comes with a giant medical red flag. A flag so big that another team was willing to blow up a done deal over it. So how do you, as the guy in charge, weigh the potential reward on the field against that very real, newly introduced risk?
So let's actually look at these numbers because they tell a really interesting story. If you just ignored the medical stuff and only looked at his production, Epinesa is exactly the kind of guy the Colts would be targeting. Look at that 3-year stretch from 2022 to 2024. 6.5 sacks, 6.5 again, then 6. That is the definition of consistent pressure off the edge. And just to put that in perspective, those numbers would have made him one of the top pass rushers on the Colts roster each of those seasons. He got 19 of his 24 career sacks in that window. So we're not talking about some fringe guy here. He's proven he can be a productive starter in the NFL, which makes this whole risk-reward thing even more fascinating.
And this is the brutal, ironic twist of this whole situation. The very thing that blew up A.J. Epenesa's career plan, that failed physical, is the exact thing that makes him a huge strategic weapon for the Indianapolis Colts. Because of that medical red flag, his price tag just fell through the floor. That $5 million deal he had with the Browns? Gone. Any new deal he gets is going to be for way less money, and you can bet it's going to be loaded with incentives and protections for the team. So the Colts now have this amazing opportunity to sign a starting caliber player, not for what he's worth on the open market, but for a huge discount. They can offer him a low-risk, one-year, prove-it kind of deal. This move fills a major need right now while keeping all their future financial options open. It's a potential home run that was only made possible because another team decided he was too risky.
And right here, this is the moment our two stories slam into each other. This is the whole point of today's explainer. On the macro level, the big picture, you have the league owners pushing for that 18th game. They talk in these abstract terms about revenue and compensating players. They kind of brush off the physical toll, saying injuries can be managed. But the risk, the actual physical price of that extra game, that's a cost paid entirely by the players' bodies. And then, on the micro level, in the story of A.J. Epinesa, you see what that risk actually looks like in the real world. The wear and tear on his body from years of playing this brutal game, the very thing an 18th game would make worse, directly and instantly wiped out a multi-million-dollar contract and put his entire career in jeopardy. The abstract risk the league wants all players to take on is the exact same concrete risk that just cost one guy a fortune.
So, as this slow march toward an 18-game season seems to continue, it just leaves us with this one final question you can't avoid. As the NFL, this multi-billion-dollar entertainment machine, keeps pushing for more games, more content, more money, we as fans have to ask ourselves, who is really paying the price? Is it the owners who will watch their teams become even more valuable? Is it the league whose bank accounts will overflow? Or is it the players, the men on the field, whose bodies are the product being sold, and whose long-term health is the real currency being spent in the brutal economy of the NFL? It's just something to think about the next time you hear somebody casually bring up expanding the season. So what do you guys think? Is an 18-game season inevitable? Let me know your take down in the comments. And if you enjoyed this explainer and you stuck with me this long, please do me a favor, hit that like button and subscribe to NFL Nexus for more deep dives connecting the dots across the league. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.